could have knocked me over with a feather when I heard it, because I really, when I woke up in the morning, would not have thought that was going to happen.
The announcement that the Bucksport mill will close by the end of this year came as a surprise to workers. Verso officials made the announcement yesterday afternoon. Good evening, I'm Samantha Edwards. Officials say Verso paper has not been profitable for years, and there are mixed feelings among union and mill workers. Now, News Center has team coverage on this story tonight, and we're going to send things to Chris Fascini, who is live in Prospect across from Bucksport. Chris, some of these workers have been employed for many years, and I can imagine this has been quite the, last night and day for them.
Yeah, it certainly has been hard for them to take, Samantha. As you point out, we are sitting here looking across the river at the town of Bucksport and the Verso paper mill behind me. Now, as you drive into Bucksport, you see the town. It says Bucksport, rich in heritage, looking to the future. And boy, do they have to look to the future more so than ever right now. This mill is such a huge part of this town. As you pointed out, you know, there are hundreds of jobs. This is nearly half the tax base for the town. And then there's all the spin-off businesses, all those mom and pops in downtown Bucksport that depend on that mill to support them. Now, as you point out, we have team coverage tonight. We're going to start off by talking about the people that are hit the hardest, and that is, of course, the workers at that mill. And for that, I'm joined now by Katie Bavoso. Katie, you talked to some of these workers today, and you know, it's something I think mill workers know. If you work in the industry, this can happen, but when it does, boy, it hits hard.
Chris, you're absolutely right. And as locals describe it, this is a mill town. Generations of family members have put in their time right over at that mill, and now it's become a part of them. Now we're going to see family members who are just shocked that it's closing down. There are more than 570 people who are losing their jobs when this mill closes in December, and they describe it as both shocking and heartbreaking.
Even though as workers, you know, times are tough, especially in the paper industry. You just never really prepared for the news that we got yesterday.
I never thought I'd live through the day when that closed down.
Bruce Snowman worked at the Bucksport paper mill for 32 years before retiring in 1998. He calls the mill a second home, and hearing that its doors will shut for good in December breaks his heart.
And I am so sad that for a lot of them that are my age and you know, some of them just retired, it's going to be so bad. My heart goes out to them.
Bruce, his father, his brothers, and now his stepson have all worked at the mill. Now he fears for his stepson's welfare after losing his job at the mill.
He loved that place. And, you know, now he's going to be just like everybody else, you know, no money. It is very scary the way the times are.
David Murch says he worked at the mill for 40 years, but 4 months ago he saw production irreversibly declining, so he made the decision to retire.
I got everything together and got out. We all know what the market is for paper. It's garbage. Nobody buys magazines. There's too much paper in the market right now, and something has to come out of the mix, and Bucksport's it.
But while David got out when he could, hundreds of his friends and co-workers will now lose the only jobs and income they've ever known.
I feel bad for the people in the mill. They're losing a very good income. It's going to be an adjustment for them.
With hundreds of people facing unemployment in the coming months, whatever the future holds for the town of Bucksport after December is anyone's guess.
God, it's going to turn into a ghost town.
Change happens. You have to move on. You have to make the adjustments, keep your feet on the ground, and take care of yourself.
While there was a somber mood throughout the town today, many people said they're going to look after their neighbors, especially those who are losing their jobs come December, and they're going to try to push forward as Bucksport moves into the next chapter. And now there might be some tough roads ahead, but they say they're going to try to do everything they can to be ready for it. Chris?
All right, thanks very much, Katie. So hard to hear some of those stories. And as Katie pointed out, you know, people have worked at that mill for generations. Some of them have been there for decades. The mill does have a rich history in this town, and a little bit of the history. The mill actually opened in 1930, and then it was known as the Maine Seaboard Paper Company. It produced newsprint. In 1946, Time Inc. actually purchased the mill and then hired St. Regis to operate it for them. They produced the coated paper that the Bucksport mill has become known for. Now, St. Regis purchased the mill in 1947, and over the next 3.5 decades, expanded the mill and improved it to keep up with technology. It was then July 1984 when Champion International acquired the mill from St. Regis, and then International Paper bought Champion, which included that Bucksport mill in 2000, and finally it was Verso that bought the mill from IP in 2006. Of course, that's the heritage, the history of the mill, but again, as we pointed out, they do have to look to the future right now. That includes the town of Bucksport. And for more on that part of the story, I'm joined by Grady Trimble. And Grady, you said you talked to the town officials and they saw this coming and they had been preparing, right?
That's right, Chris. You know, they seem to all be on the same page. They've been planning for the worst but hoping for the best for quite some time now, several years. And to give you an idea of just how much money the mill brings into the town, it accounts for about 44% of the town's total tax revenue. That's more than $4 million each year. But 44% is actually a lot lower than it's been in the past. Years ago, the mill made up around 75% of Bucksport's tax revenue when it was at its highest. Now town officials started to put together a plan to decrease that number over time. That way, when the day came that the mill would close, the town will be ready and still have a large emergency fund. Right now, the total surplus set aside is about $8 million, but town officials say they can't just rely on that money. They are also considering increasing taxes and maybe even cutting some jobs. Bucksport's town manager says he's also going to bring in a private company to reassess the value of the mill, which will likely drop by hundreds of millions of dollars. The lower valuation could bring in government funding for the town, but at the moment, all options are still on the table.
You've got to take care of the fact that right now the mill's no longer going to operate. If it does come back, somebody buys it, or they decide to bring it back into service, that's a benefit to the town, but we have to go and actually take action based on the fact that we no longer have the mill as a revenue source.
We wanted to diversify our economy and really encourage new businesses and really showcase the community. And, you know, Bucksport, I think, has always been somewhat in the shadow of the mill. And, you know, my whole goal was to put the mill in the shadow of the town.
It's also worth noting that the town still has tax assets in Verso's paper-making machines and the power plant, which will remain open. And town officials, as you heard, Chris, are looking to bring in more local businesses as well as promote tourism in the area.
A lot of work ahead for the town. All right, thank you very much for that report, Grady. And of course, it's not just the town of Bucksport. This certainly is having ripple effects across the entire state, and we're getting reaction from all corners. Members of the congressional delegation from Maine reacting today. That includes Congressman Mike Michaud, who was a mill worker himself for 29 years at Great Northern Paper. He held a press conference today at the Eastern Maine Labor Council in Brewer, where he actually criticized Governor LePage for what he calls failed leadership in helping the paper industry over the years, and he got pretty emotional when he talked about the future of the industry.
The mill closing, like the one we learned about yesterday, are more than just headlines. They're traumatic events impacting Maine families all across our state.
Now, Congressman Michaud a bit choked up about the mill closure, but he told a group of union leaders and workers gathered at the Eastern Maine Labor Council that he has a plan to fix the problems of the struggling paper industry. He laid out a 6-point plan, which he said included holding a summit within 30 days of taking office, if elected, where he'd include all the stakeholders, the industry reps, the mill workers, the owners. He also said he'd work with the New England governors to deal with energy issues, implement new rules and laws to hold private companies accountable when they take public funding. He'd look to put a moratorium on changes to Maine's tax programs, reduce energy costs through long-term renewable energy contracts, and lastly, to try and establish an emergency reserve fund for towns that are hit hard when mills do close. Now, Michaud said this isn't a political issue, but during his speech, he did take several shots at LePage for what he says failure to prevent this from happening.
Raise a family and to live. What is this plan? As chief executive of this state, you have the bully pulpit and the power to play a pivotal role in protecting jobs and developing a long-term strategic plan for the paper industry. No one else has that bully pulpit. It's not enough to put a sign on the interstate saying open for business.
Now, I asked Congressman Michaud how he felt about his own record in Congress trying to advocate for the paper industry in Maine. He said he was proud of the work he was able to do to try and get assistance for workers who'd been laid off to get job retraining. He said he was disappointed that about the free trade agreements, which of course were passed by Congress back in 2011. Now, someone who might take issue with Congressman Michaud's criticism of Governor LePage is Governor LePage himself. He actually was in Holden today at Maine Military Supply Company to talk about what he plans to do to try and help the mill. For more on that part of the story, we're going to send things back to our studio. Samantha Edwards, you talked to the governor today.
That's right, Chris. Governor Paul LePage says he knows the paper industry has been struggling in the state of Maine, but he was just as surprised as others when Verso Paper announced that they would be closing. The governor reacted to Congressman Mike Michaud's claim that he could have done something more to prevent it.
If he's got a crystal ball, could I borrow it? Because that's Monday morning quarterbacking, and that's ridiculous. If he had an insight that this was going to happen, which I did not, he should have told us.
LePage says he, like others, thought the announcement was going to be about a merger between Verso Paper and NewPage. Now LePage says his administration will drop everything and focus on Bucksport and the workers who are affected there. The Department of Labor has already sent crews down to look at what work is available in the area. The state also will be applying for federal help. LePage says he will continue to have the state and his administration look for potential buyers to bring both the mill and workers back and up and running. The governor telling the crowd at this point the focus is on the workers and their families.
Very concerned. We're concerned for the employees. We're concerned for the town. My understanding is they heard it at the same time, just after we heard it at the press conference. Bucksport has become a priority to make sure, and most importantly, make sure that people don't struggle through the holidays.
Governor LePage hopes lawmakers will see this incident in Bucksport and work on the state's high cost of energy and outdated technology, something LePage claims they have not done enough with. Another person weighing in, independent Elliot Cutler was in News Center studios today and weighed in on the Verso situation as well. Cutler says amongst all that there is still a great future for papermaking in Maine as long as officials think about the future of the state.
Why are we surprised when in the face of 5 to 6% annual decline in worldwide demand, we've got problems in the paper industry? Why are we surprised when the president, Dave Patterson of Verso, said to me yesterday, we've been losing money for 6 straight years?
Now, Cutler says that he doesn't think this was an issue caused by the state policies that are in place, but rather the state policies that are not in place. And the Bucksport mill has had help from the state and local and federal government in recent years to try and cut costs and save jobs. And the company has invested considerably into the mill as well. But that help has only apparently delayed the inevitable. Now, in November of 2009, the state's Efficiency Maine program awarded $2 million to Verso Paper to make energy-efficient improvements at the mill. A few months later, in January of 2010, the Department of Energy announced it was awarding Verso $9.3 million in grants to be spent at its 3 mills. The company coupled that money with other investments and spent $47 million to upgrade its biomass boiler and install a 25-megawatt turbine to generate electricity in Bucksport. The mill also received a long-term contract from state regulators in 2011 to sell power at favorable rates, and it received tax breaks from the town of Bucksport in the form of TIFs in 1997 and 2000. One of those TIFs was extended in 2012. Bucksport leaders say Verso also invested tens of millions to upgrade the woodyard and other property in recent years. And with the changing season, firefighters say it's important to prepare your house to be safe. We'll tell you what they suggest coming up.